Welcome again to yet another lesson in taxonomy. Today we are in lesson 3, where we shall look at kingdom Plantae. This is a kingdom comprising of plants. Now the characteristics of plants: 1, they are multicellular, meaning they are made up of many cells. 2, they are eukaryotic, meaning they have a eukaryotic cell, a cell that has a distinct nucleus with a nuclear membrane and distinct organelles. For the cell of the plants, we also find it has plastids in it, and it also has a cell wall in addition to the cell membrane. Plastids are basically small spherical structures in the cytoplasm of the plant that serve different functions. So they comprise of the leucoplasts, the amyloplasts, and the chloroplasts. For the plants, they have autotrophic nutrition, meaning the plants make their own food, and they make their own food by the process of photosynthesis. For the plants, the reproduction, it can either be sexual or asexual. It can be sexual, where they produce gametes, so we talk about the ovules and the pollen grains, which will undergo fertilization to produce a new plant. They also have asexual reproduction, and there are different forms of asexual reproduction. We have got budding, there is fragmentation, there is vegetative propagation as examples of asexual reproduction in plants. For the plants, they do not locomote. Plants cannot move from one point to the other. In kingdom Plantae, there are 4 divisions. So you have the division Bryophyte, the division Felicinophyte, the division Coniferophyte, and the division Angiospermatophyte. Now to start off with the Bryophyte. Generally, Bryophyte comprise of simple plants we simply refer to as Bryophytes. Bryophytes are the simplest land plants. They are thought to have evolved from the algae, which tend to be aquatic in nature, and represent the migration of plants from water onto land. They are not very well adapted to life on land, so they are normally found in areas that are in between aquatic and terrestrial. These areas are referred to as amphibious zones. For that reason, we find the Bryophytes being referred to as the amphibious plants. For the characteristics of Bryophytes, we have for them, they have an alternation of generations. They have an alternation between a Gametophyte, haploid generation, and a Sporophyte, diploid generation in their life cycle. So within the life cycle, at some point, we will have the Gametophyte, the stage where we have gametes being formed. It tends to be haploid in nature. And at some stage in the life cycle, we shall have the Sporophyte generation, where we have the spores being formed, and that stage is diploid in nature. So therefore, we say they have an alternation of generations: Gametophyte generation, when gametes are formed, and Sporophyte generation, when spores are formed. Now, the dominant generation is the Gametophyte. So when you come across a Bryophyte, the plant body that you see is a Gametophyte. Now, this Gametophyte may be a thallus, or it can be differentiated into simple leaves and stem. A thallus refers to a simple plant that is not differentiated into leaves, stem, and roots, and also does not have vascular tissue, that is the xylem and the phloem. For the Bryophytes, we find that because the Gametophyte is dominant, the Sporophyte is actually attached to and is dependent on the Gametophyte. We have within the Sporophyte, it has a spore case or a sporangium within which spores are produced. For the Bryophytes rather, they don't have vascular tissue, so we say they are avascular. They don't have a xylem and a phloem. But the plants do possess chloroplasts, and they carry out photosynthesis. Now, for their life cycle, we normally say they normally have a Gametophyte generation, which is haploid in nature, and in the Gametophyte generation, gametes are formed by the process of mitosis, So the gametes are also haploid in nature. Then the two gametes formed in the gametophyte will fuse in fertilization and form a zygote, which is diploid in nature. The diploid zygote then develops and forms the sporophyte, which is diploid in nature. The sporophyte has a sporangium within which spores are produced by meiosis. So the spores are haploid in nature. And these spores, when they are released and environmental conditions are favorable, they germinate into the gametophytes and the cycle repeats itself. Now, for division Bryophyte, this division has two classes. We have the class Hepaticae, comprising of liverworts, and the class Mossy, comprising of mosses. For characteristics of organisms or bryophytes in the class Hepaticae, that is the liverworts, for the liverworts, the gametophyte is either flat and is a thallus, or it can be leafy. So the gametophyte has an alternative. It can either be a thallus or it can be leafy. Leafy meaning it is made up of simple leaves and a stem. If it is leafy, the leaves are arranged on the stem in 3 ranks, 2 ranks on the sides and then 1 rank in the middle. They have root-like structures called rhizoids. The rhizoids for the Hepaticae are unicellular. They are made up of a single cell, so they are delicate. The sporophyte of the Hepaticae has valves in it that assist in spore dispersal. The Hepaticae tend to be found on the banks of streams, on wet vegetation, and so forth. On the other hand, class Mossy, comprising of the mosses, their characteristics, their gametophyte is leafy, and it has a simple stem. Then the leaves are spirally arranged around the stem. The rhizoids are multicellular, so a bit more complex than those of the Hepaticae. The sporophyte has a capsule with teeth-like structures in it that assist in spore dispersal. For them, they tend to be found in damp places. So you'll find them growing in gardens that tend to be wet most of the time, and so forth. For the Mossy, basically, with the multicellular rhizoids and the leafy gametophyte, they tend to be more differentiated compared to the Hepaticae. We had said the bryophytes are simple and they are found in amphibious zones. So they are not very well adapted to life on land and still need water for reproduction to take place, especially so fertilization. Now, because of their limitations on land, we find for the bryophytes, they tend to be short plants. Reason, they cannot grow to be very large since they don't have proper support structures for anchorage, such as the roots and even branches. They also tend to only be able to get the water that is near the surface of the soil or on the soil surface because they don't have distinctive roots. Then we have division Philicinophyte. For the characteristics of division Philicinophyte, 1, they have an alternation of generations between the sporophyte generation and the gametophyte generation. But for the Philicinophyte, the sporophyte is the dominant generation. So the plant body of the Philicinophyte comprises of the sporophyte. The gametophyte is reduced, is very small in size. It is delicate, cannot survive where there is no water, and it only persists for a given period of time, and it is referred to as a prothallus. For the sporophyte, which forms the plant body, it is well differentiated into 2 roots, stem, and leaves. It has got vascular tissue present, so you have got the xylem and the phloem. The leaves are relatively large and are called fronds. We find every leaf comprises of a simple branch called a rachis. And then from the rachis, we have a number of leaflets called pinnules, and then all those leaflets along with the rachis collectively form the one leaf we are referring to as a frond. The spores are produced in sporangia. The sporangia are usually found on the lower side of the leaves, and they occur in clusters or groups. A group of sporangia is called soras. If there are many, they become sori. Every group of sporangia or each sorus is covered by a protective covering called an indusium. Then you go to the characteristics of the division Coniferophyta. Now, Coniferophyta and Angiospermatophyta are seed-bearing plants, and earlier on in classification, they had been put in one particular division, and basically they are referred to as the pteridophytes, meaning seed-bearing plants. But then you find that some are seed-bearing and they produce flowers, some do not produce flowers. So the basis of flowers now, we have put them in separate divisions. So in division Coniferophyta, we have these are basically seed-bearing, non-flowering plants. Now for these seed-bearing, non-flowering plants, their characteristics that are outstanding, we have got one, they produce cones. Now basically they have got scale-like leaves, and then the scale-like leaves are arranged to form cones. So for that reason, we talk about the Coniferophyta producing cones. And on these cones, cones comprising of the scale-like leaves, is where we tend to find the sporangia, that is where we tend to find the spores, that is where we tend to find the seeds attached on the cones. Now, some of the cones become specialized to form the reproductive structures. So some will be specialized to form the female reproductive structures, some will be specialized to form the male reproductive structures. If a cone has ovules attached to it, then it plays the role of the female reproductive structure. If a cone has the pollen sacs attached to it, then it plays the role of the male reproductive structures. So these cones that are modified by having ovules or pollen sacs on them are referred to as sporophylls. So we are expecting in the Coniferophyta, therefore, they have got sporophylls, male sporophylls and female sporophylls. Both male and female are found on the same plant, but in different locations. The females tend to be larger in size compared to the male. For the female sporophylls, the two ovules are found attached basically on the upper side. For the male sporophylls, the two pollen sacs in which pollen grains are found attached on the lower side. This is to enhance pollination, whereby once the pollen grains are released from the pollen sacs on the lower side, they easily land on the ovules that are on the upper side of the female sporophyll. Now, for the case of the Coniferophyta, the other characteristic, they do not produce flowers, therefore they do not have an ovary, so no ovary. The other characteristic, because there is no ovary, the ovules are not protected, so you talk about them having naked ovules. After fertilization and the ovules form seeds, these seeds are not in a fruit. They don't form fruits because they don't have an ovary. So again, the other characteristic is that they do not form fruits. And the other characteristic is that the seeds are not protected. For them, they do have the vascular tissue, but we find the xylem comprising of tracheids only, and there are no vessel elements, meaning the xylem is made up of the simpler type of cells. Now, Coniferophyta has got three classes. You have got the classes Pinopsida, comprising of the pines, the class Cycadopsida, comprising of the cycads, the class Coniferocida, comprising of the conifers. The conifers tend to be the majority class compared to the others and have a bearing on the naming of this particular division. And then we go on to the last division in the kingdom Plantae, that is the division Angiospermatophyta. So Angiospermatophyta comprises of seed-bearing, flowering plants. So for the seed-bearing, flowering plants, in terms of characteristics, one, they produce flowers, and the flowers are the reproductive structures. That is where you find the male reproductive structures and the female reproductive structures. Male reproductive structures comprising of the filament and the anther, within which you find the pollen sacs, and pollen grains are formed there. The female reproductive structure comprising of the ovary, with the ovules in it, the style, and the stigma. Now, for the Angiospermatophyta, the ovules are protected in the ovary because they are flowers. The seeds, when they are formed, again, they are protected within the ovary. Because they have an ovary, Angiospermatophyta form fruits. For them, the xylem vessels, the xylem basically is made up of vessel elements. Now, for the Angiospermatophyta, we say they are more adapted to life on land compared to the Coniferophyta. Reason is because for them, pollination is made easier by the presence of the flowers. The flowers are adapted to attracting various pollinating agents, therefore improving or making higher chances of pollination to take place. Now, for this particular division of Angiospermatophyta, there are two classes, the class Dicotyledone and the class Monocotyledone. Dicotyledone comprising of dicotyledons or simply dicots, Monocotyledone comprising of monocotyledons, simply referred to as the monocots. For the characteristics of the dicotyledons, we have two cotyledons in the seed. Their leaves have got reticulate venation, or what some may refer to as network venation. The stems have got a ring-like arrangement of the vascular bundles. They have got a taproot system. Most of them tend to have secondary growth, except the ones that are herbaceous in nature. And the flowers tend to have petals in multiples of 4 or 5. For the characteristics of the monocotyledons, one, they tend to have one cotyledon. The leaves have got parallel venation. The stem has got the vascular bundles being scattered. They tend to have a fibrous root system. They do not have secondary growth. And the flowers tend to have petals in multiples of 3. Now, between the two classes, in class Angiospermatophyta, we find the dicots with their secondary growth. They are more adapted to life on land, and they tend to be more compared to the monocotyledons. And with that, we come to the end of lesson 3. Thank you and stay safe.
These televised lectures supplement our robust online learning going on our MKU online platform. You can view more on our televised lectures via our online platform. We are in a digital era, and Mount Kenya University knows this. The following are the steps to follow so as to complete your online application. Download the application form from the website www.mku.ac.ke. Attach copies of your academic certificates and ID. Pay the application fees via M-Pesa pay bill number 270988. Your ID is the account number. 2,000 shillings is the charge for a postgraduate. You can also deposit in the bank accounts provided on the website. Then email all the above to apply@mku.ac.ke.